Hi, it's Mr. Ripka, and he's reading Neruda during Corona. Thank you. And we have reached poem LXVIII. Yes, poem 68. 68. Though we have been on this COVID-19 quarantine for longer than 68 days, according to Governor Cuomo a couple days ago, we are on day 96. Day 96. 96 days of staying at home. If I remember correctly, though, it was sometime in March, near the Ides of March, actually, where we were told to stay home. If only Caesar had been told to stay home. That would have changed a lot, perhaps. At any rate, let us continue. So we've been doing this quarantine for about 3 months in a way. We've been reading poetry, Neruda's poetry, for about 2 months. We're on poem 68, so I missed a few days in there a little bit, so it's been probably 70-something days of reading Neruda. Wow. We only have a few more days left. Thank you again for staying with me and enduring. I've talked often about Neruda's poetry and his sort of ability, or at the any rate, at the lowest rate, his desire to combine the inner and the outer experiences. I want to read something by another writer who is writing. His name is Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke. These are some beautiful, it's a small book, it's a lovely book. It says Letters to a Young Poet. And Rilke is a wonderful German poet, beautiful poet, writer, and he's writing to this young poet who wants to become a poet too. And these letters are intimate and lovely. Rilke, by the way, was born in 1875, it says in the back of the book. He's a great German lyric poet. Published his first collections of poems in 1898 and became renowned for his delicate depictions of the workings of the human heart. And so, drawn by some sympathetic notes in his poems, young people would often write to Rilke with their problems and hopes. And from 1903 to 1908, he wrote a series of remarkable responses to a young would-be poet on poetry. And these things survive as a sensitive observer in a harsh world. Wow. The world that was harsh in 1903. It's still pretty harsh out there. And so we have a lot of sensitive observers in harsh worlds. And so this book is one way to help fellow sensitive observers stay healthy and happy. I just want to read quickly what he says, and then we're going to get to the questions. He says here in letter 9, Dear Mr. Kappas, that's the young poet's name. He says, there is perhaps no use of my going into your particular points right now. For what I could say about your tendency to doubt, or about your inability to bring the outer and the inner life into unison, or about all other things that worry you. It is always what I have already said, always the wish that you may find patience enough in yourself to endure, and simplicity enough to believe, that you may acquire more and more confidence in that which is difficult, and in your solitude and among others. And for the rest, let life happen to you. Believe me, life is right in any case. How inspiring. So it's a common challenge, I think, for sensitive folks, poets, artists, and just generally speaking, people with artistic sensitivity. It's a common challenge of bringing the outer and the inner life into unison, as he is commenting upon. And he has great advice. Essentially, let life happen. Believe me, life is right. Beautiful Rilke. One thing I wanted to read that because Neruda, also talks about the outer and inner life, and through his childlike questions, he attempts to bring these worlds that seem like a dichotomy, like they're so separate. Through these lovely childlike questions, he can have a surreal poem or question that brings them together. So let's see what he says today. We have imagery. By the way, we're still doing words, language. in things like that. So he's going to have imagery of written word now, letters, numbers, and then again naming things, calling things names, and defining things. All right, so he says here in Spanish, cuando lee la mariposa, lo que vuela escrito en sus alas. Lovely things. Mariposa, beautiful, right? It's the time of the year to see the mariposa out there, the butterfly. And sus alas, his wings. Yes, so something, right, is escrito, written on the alas de la mariposa, on the wings of the butterfly. But what is he asking? We'll see when we read the English. The next one, ¿Qué letras conoce la abeja para saber su itinerario? So we have letras, letters. So we had before that escrito, now we have letras, letters. Conoce is to understand. La abeja, back to the bee. He loves bees. He loves flying things. As we've talked about before, we have butterflies before and bees now. And then we have, we'll go on to the third one. It says, ¿Y con qué cifras va restando la hormiga sus soldados muertos? There's that muertos. Death is a topic for sensitive poets and people out there, of course. Philosophy itself is about learning how to die, in a way. Becoming comfortable with that part of existence, a vital, necessary part of the coming and going of things. So he loves to talk about that, the muertos, but he has here also the hormiga, the ant. So not a flying thing, although maybe the queen ant flies. Not sure about that. But anyway, most ants don't fly, pretty sure. But we have a mariposa, abeja, hormiga, butterfly, bee, and an ant. All right, last thing we have here, ¿Cómo se llaman los ciclones cuando no tiene movimiento? Fun words. Once again, if you read these Spanish questions and with the right rhythm and the beautiful pronunciation, if Neruda were here to read these, I'm sure they would sound gorgeous with the language, because he is a exquisitely brilliant, sensitive poet and very sensitive to language. So we have a lot of O's here. I didn't really emphasize it. Como se llaman los ciclones cuando no tienen movimiento. I'm sure when Neruda says it, it has this beautiful como se llaman los ciclones cuando no tiene movimiento. Something of this nature. If only he had recorded these for us, that would have been beautiful. At any rate, let's see what we're having here in English. We have our 4 questions. The number 1 says, cuando, when does the butterfly read what flies written on its wings? So literally, when does the butterfly read? Like read, interesting. Okay, so when does the butterfly read that which has been written by a fly on his wings? Or that which the fly wrote on his wings. So maybe like a little fly, we got a butterfly, whoo, little fly comes in, lands on his wing, writes a little love note, little Neruda poetry, little poem, maybe a little question, and then flies away. The fly does. The butterfly continues to flutter. I always thought they should be called flutterflies, but whatever, butterfly works, because they're kind of delicate, like butter, I guess. Anyway, when does the butterfly read that which the fly wrote on its wings? It's a beautiful image. A little, also unity of animals, of flying objects. All right, next one. So, it can understand its itinerary. Which letters does the bee know? So at first that so makes you think, right? It makes you think, oh, it's related to the previous question. When does the butterfly read what the fly has written on its wings? And then you think, so it can understand its itinerary. It starts making you think, and maybe it is related. Maybe the fly wrote something on the wing about his itinerary. But then you got the next clause. Which letters does the bee know? And that tells us there that we're talking now about la abeja, a bee, and how a bee can understand an itinerary to fly. Go do his thing and come back. And which letters does he know? Does he know the word, if the letter B? That would be appropriate, right? If a bee knew the letter B. Yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, it says so. Here's the question. ¿Qué letras conoce la abeja? And honestly, I don't even see why the translator says so. I don't even see so. I see what letters does the bee know in order to understand his itinerary. That's what I see in the Spanish. ¿Qué letras conoce la abeja para saber, to understand, su itinerario, his itinerary, his trip. So the word so in there, it's a beautiful written translation, but it seems like it could lead the reader away from what is actually happening in the Spanish. Anyway, we'll keep going. It says number 3, and this, they do have and there, E, so we have and. So, and with which numbers does the ant subtract its dead soldiers? So these things seem to be wondering about language of animals, right? Butterflies reading what flies have written on the wings. Is it in a language itself? What kind of language is it? Does it use letters, words, symbols? Who knows? But he's wondering about the language of animals. And then he's wondering what letters does the bee know so that it can get to where it needs to go. And then the other one is, what numbers does an ant know? Well, there are ants. We have, I mean, there must be 3 ant hills right around me, and they are in mass. They come out in legion. The ants are no joke. And so if they do subtract their dead, they must be able to count pretty high. It says, and with which numbers does the ant subtract its dead soldiers? I like that, calling ants soldiers. It's interesting that he's using bees and ants. I find this significant and interesting. It's an ancient image that's used often in the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid. These 2 animals specifically are used quite a bit when describing industrious work that is metaphorical for humans doing industrious work together in a unified way where everybody has a job and is doing something and it's working together and the community is industrious and healthy. Ants and bees are many times used because you can make an epic simile, right? You have a leader, you have workers, you have so-and-so, and I mean, it's a whole colony, it's a population in a way. So they're used often. So I wonder if he's bringing that idea in here, this idea of bees and ants having a community where they have to interact with each other because everybody's doing something in there, right? You have the person who's a worker, the person who's not letting the guy in who doesn't have the food for the bee or whatever. So how do they know that? It's just written into their soul. Well, if it's written into their soul, I think Neruda would ask them with what language and how and what letters. Anyway, so those are thoughts to think about for those 3 questions. The last question, actually, he gets away from animal imagery, gets away from the mariposa, abeja, and the hormiga, the ant. And he gets to the los cyclones, cyclones. That seems like a drastic jump from one thing to another. Butterflies, bees, ants, very small, almost delicate-like creatures, and then just cyclone. Crazy. His question says, what are cyclones called when they stand still? What? I like that. It says here in the Spanish, ¿Cómo se llaman los ciclones cuando no tiene movimiento? What are cyclones called when they have no movement? Is what the literal translation is. Obviously, when they stand still is perfectly fine. All right, there we go. Those are your 4 questions, LXVIII, poem 68. And I'm going to go through the 4 questions in English one time kind of quickly, just going through them so that you can see them all together. And you can start making your own understanding, your own interpretation of what all 4 of these questions combined suggest. What is he really asking here in poem 68? Well, let's go try to compile the 4 questions right now so that you can figure out what all of these add up to. Here we go. When does the butterfly read what the fly wrote on its wings? What letters does the bee understand so that it knows its itinerary? And with which numbers does the ant subtract its dead soldiers? What are cyclones called when they stand still? That's a powerful question, just the stand still, the whoom, the end. It's like a symphony just coming to an end suddenly. Well, guess what? We aren't coming to an end. Well, today we are, but we'll be back tomorrow for poem LXIX. We're going to have 3 questions for you tomorrow. I hope you can join me. Thanks again for joining me. Thanks again for enduring this quarantine with Neruda with me. I've been really enjoying it, like I said before, and I appreciate it. And I hope that you've been staying safe and staying healthy and keep asking questions.